Today we're actually starting our 11th year on the air, and because of that I want to put out a thank you to the studio here for continuing to support the show and our crew members as well. And we do have an email address. It's talkingtogetherfeedback@gmail.com, and we're interested in both pro and con reactions, so please get in touch. Now today we're going to be talking about the various issues that the Cape Cod chapter of Veterans for Peace is involved in, and I'm here with 4 members of Veterans for Peace. The title of the show is Veterans for Peace and the Fallout from Constant War. And Billy Stewart is directly opposite me, and Bob Silverberg, and Duke Ellis, and Cole Morton sitting right next to me. So Bob, why don't you start off with, I understand that you have a poem that'll kind of get the show going.
Okay, and the last line of the poem is very, very definitely part of our discussion today. My poem is called Recipe for War. Use a pentagon-shaped bowl. Take 2 opposing points of view. Add many parts imagined wrongs, minus 1 part rationality. Stir until overheated. Mix in the following ingredients: raw recruits, National Guard troops, body counts, government lies, corporate payoffs, friendly fire, bigotry, rape, and collateral damage. Omit civilian deaths. Prolong baking in desert heat for multiple tours of duty. While waiting for a result, pierce with explosive roadside devices. After too many years, declare a victory. Generally discard surviving leftovers.
Very good, Bob. Thank you very much for that. Cole, you want to start us off?
I'm going to what?
You want to start us off?
Okay, all right. I'm just here to mostly to plug a war veterans creativity group that is being started on October 11th, 2012. I'm just going to read from the poster that we're going to put around. And it's a new, small group facilitated by war veterans. Veterans of all wars are welcome to participate. The group will include poetry, writing, art, photography, video, etc. The idea is to express yourself without judgment. All group sessions are private and confidential. The first session, as I said, is October 11th, 2012. They will be every Thursday at 6 p.m. Walk-ins are welcome, and they will be at the Hyannis Vet Center, not to be confused with the Veterans Clinic, not to be confused with the Non-Vets Association Outreach Center. They will be at the Hyannis Vet Center at 474 West Main Street. And I really want to stress that both women and men, war veterans, are included. These will be small groups. And also, we're gearing towards those who have little or no experience in expressing themselves creatively. Prior experience is not required. As a matter of fact, maybe it's preferred.
Okay, Duke?
This is a great example, I think, of the kind of project that VFP members are involved in. Max Money, another member of our chapter, is doing the group with Cole, and it's just another way that Veterans for Peace actualizes its purpose to abolish war, by preventing war, by revealing the true costs of war, and by healing the casualties of war, military and civilian. And just to orient people towards our chapter, most people probably know we've been on the Cape for about 20 years. And a year and a half ago we decided to dedicate our chapter specifically to healing the wounds of war, especially the hidden wounds of war, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, suicide, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. And we renamed our chapter in honor of a Marine Corps Reserve vet, Corporal Jeffrey Lucy, with the blessings of his parents, who a year after he was back from deployment, he was part of the initial invasion of Iraq, was back about a year when he, back about 6 months when he began to display serious symptoms of PTSD and was having a lot of trouble. Had difficulty engaging the VA and had some difficult problems, obviously, but took his own life almost a year after returning home. So in March of 2011, we dedicated our chapter in his name, and we dedicated part of our work to healing the wounds of war.
Yes, I was actually at that. I believe it was at Barnstable High School.
Yeah,
That was a wonderful event, I thought.
Yeah.
Billy.
Well, I do the outreach coordination for the Veterans for Peace. I also am on the board of directors at the Non-Vet Center, the Cape Cod Veterans Outreach. With the Veterans for Peace, I think that both of those folks just mentioned what we've been doing. What I'll probably touch on, what I will touch on today is some of the homeless and some of the food pantry things that we do at the Non-Vet Center. And we'll try to very briefly touch, even though I don't have all the information, this new brain trauma center that we've inherited from the Grace family in New Seabury. We signed the papers 2 days ago to take over this building that was given to us by the Grace family. The basics is this: the father was a Marine during World War II, came under heavy fire, and made a little pledge that, God, if I ever get out of this foxhole and home alive, I'll do anything you want me to. But he forgot about it until he came home and his younger daughter got a virus or something that caused brain damage. And so she passed, and he created this brain center in her memory. And it had been working, but he passed. And then the son didn't know what to do with it anymore. So he made a phone call to the Veterans Office in Boston, Coleman Nee, who also is an Iraqi veteran, and trying to find out what he could do. He recommended the Non-Vet Center, Cape Cod Outreach Center, and so we've been in meetings and everything for about a year. It's a wonderful building. It's a great gift. But I've been involved with the Veterans Movement now going on since '67 when I was discharged, one way or the other. And like the other brothers here, working towards peace, resolve of conflicts.
Okay. At some point in our discussion, I want to talk about the connection between PTSD, suicides, depression, all of that, and what you might call the militarization of our society, which I think plays a big role in all of this. But what I'd like to do now is to talk about the actual extent of the problems. Like, why don't we start with homelessness among vets? Do you have statistics on that? If I could just start, if I can find it. I actually came across, I came across a couple of articles, but this one in particular, which talks about, how veterans fit into the overall homelessness situation. It says, this is, by the way, this is from this project called Project Foot. And I can't tell you, how up to date this is because it didn't tell me. But these are what they're saying. 23% of the homeless population are veterans, 33% of the male homeless population are veterans, 47% served the Vietnam era, 17% served the post-Vietnam era, 15% served the pre-Vietnam era, 67% served 3 or more years, 33% were stationed in a war zone, and so forth and so on. Why don't we talk a little bit about Do you know what the numbers are on the numbers of homeless vets right now in the country?
I don't have the exact figure. I'm not sure anybody might have
Well,
it.
just general.
The last I heard, there's about 100,000 veterans on any given day in this country who are homeless. And if somebody can correct the figure, fastest growing population right now are young women coming back from the wars. That's the fastest growing population now of homelessness is young women. On the Cape, and I did pick these up, the homelessness right now, to the best of our ability, there's somewhere around 125 to 150 homeless veterans on the Cape. Another interesting fact that I just had mentioned earlier, the time from the discharge before becoming homeless, for Iraqi veterans, it's 12 to 15 months after their discharge if they end up becoming homeless from the post-traumatic stress and all the other crises that may be going on and they're coming home. Vietnam vets were 5 to 6 years. So the homelessness rate for Iraqi and Afghan vets now is coming much quicker. Mm-hmm. I said the fastest growing population was women. At the non-vet center, the Cape and Outreach, I got some statistics last night. We have transitional housing. We have 16 units, 2 buildings, about 8 in each, with waiting lists up to 12 to 15 vets on each waiting list. So it's a transitional housing. So you'll get somebody like Duffy who will go out and try to find them. They'll work and we'll try to get them cleaned up, hygiene, and get them to the clinic just to be evaluated, and then bring them in, and there'll be a transition. So they'll work around the houses and stuff as they're transitioning. And some of these are Vietnam veterans that are still going through that transition 40-something years later.
Okay, so do we know what the actual reasons are for homelessness? Is it just PTSD? Is it other problems? Do we have an explanation for what the causes of homelessness among vets are?
A lot of it has to do with post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some of it also has to do with the traumatic brain injury, and they're kind of just wandering. There was a figure, and I can't remember what it is. Los Angeles has about the highest rate of homeless vets in the country, that and Miami. But that's because of the climates.
And how about the fact that we're going through this economic disaster? How has that made the situation worse for homelessness among vets?
Absolutely, yeah. As the general public and vets,
Yeah.
Sure. The vets have an additional challenge coming back to adjust and to find a job, and they may be adjusting to all kinds of different things: family problems, financial problems, combat stress injuries, etc. Jousting with the VA for benefits and services, which has been a difficult thing for a lot of vets.
Now, the VA is an issue unto itself. I mean, I guess the question I want to ask is, you read a lot about these returning soldiers who have tried to get help from the VA and they've been turned away. There are a lot of stories of that sort. Has there been a change during the Obama administration from, say, the Bush administration with regard to the way in which they're trying to help vets?
Well, go ahead.
I've been cared for by the Veterans Administration for over 20 years, and I honestly have feel that I don't notice a difference between the Bush administration and the Obama administration. I have been mostly treated with dignity and respect, and if I happen to receive some poor service from, any organization has good people and bad people. If I happen to receive bad service, I just have learned somewhere that you just pass out. You go on to the next. You're welcome. You don't have to go to the first doctor who you arrive at the VA. You don't have to go to stay with the first therapist or with the first post-traumatic stress group. That I'm a combat veteran, and I've been in many groups, and some groups were not so good, and I just left that group and went to a different group, or left that one therapist and went to a different therapist. So the short answer is I haven't.
You haven't personally. What I'm wondering is, have you gotten any feedback from other veterans groups about any difference between, say, the Bush administration and the Obama administration with regard to treatment for vets?
I know that there's a lot more money being put into the VA now because there are a lot more veterans coming from the global war on terror, as they call it, from anywhere. I've been an inpatient at the VA hospital for post-traumatic stress disorder as recently as last winter. There's the fellow there from Panama who had combat experience in Panama. A great number of young men from Afghanistan and Iraq, and I believe that the VA is, in my opinion, is doing a very excellent job. They're looking and reaching out to get more veterans to come in because, as in my case, for a long time I didn't trust anything to do with the federal government. After I was had finished with my combat experience, I didn't want to have anything to do with the federal government. And then I found out that I finally, by serendipity, I guess, I found out that I got really good treatment through the Veterans Administration. Medical treatment, psychotherapy treatment, you name it.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the VA's been playing catch-up. I don't think the VA really realized how many vets were going to come out of it, how long these conflicts were going to go on, how many people were going to be multiply deployed, because combat stress injuries of these various kinds are associated with multiple deployments. So you get people with 2, 3, 5, 6, 10 multiple deployments who've been stress injured somewhere along the line and then go back into combat and get re-traumatized. I think that we didn't know they'd go on so long, the conflicts ultimately, or there'd be so many injured people from them.
Yeah, well, this brings me to a topic I was going to get into a little later, but you've kind of touched on it, and that's the whole business about these wars. You're talking about a particular war that went on for a long time, but we have sort of historical amnesia in this country. What happened yesterday, it's old news and we sort of forget about it. It goes down Orwell's memory hole. But the truth is that this country has been at war from the very beginning. I mean, we began by annihilating the native population and bringing in slaves, and from that point on, it was just one war after another, and it's never really ended. The thing is, the public focuses on the one war at a time, and you hear all these arguments about why this is an important war and so forth and so on, but there's no sort of historical context for it, the fact that these wars don't end. And for me, I think that everything that can be done for the vets should be done without any qualification whatsoever. But to a certain extent, I also think it's almost like putting your fingers in a dike, because, unless we can do something about stopping these wars, and just the way in which these wars are discussed, guarantees that there's another war coming around the corner, because they talk about these wars in terms of whether it can be won or lost. That's the way in which it's discussed in the media. And as long as you're talking about whether a war can be won or lost, then that means that, well, maybe this war couldn't be won, so we have to put a halt to it, but maybe the next war we can win it.
Well, I think if you took there are statistics on how many people think we should continue in Iraq or continue in Afghanistan, and as the wars went on, that the population against the war grows and grows and grows, to a critical mass, and then when the conflict is over, it starts shrinking again. That's when the amnesia sets in, I guess. It starts shrinking again. But having a lot of service members in need of help like this is, we try to show the costs of war as one way of preventing that cycle, but there are Vietnam vets who call Afghanistan Vietnamistan.
Yeah,
if you live long enough, you see it repeat itself. It is rather amazing. And then you hear a candidate or a party talking about a war with Iran. And you know, there's almost no time to catch your breath and somebody's talking about it again. My understanding of it is that it comes from fear and the belief that violence is the solution to conflict. I mean, those are the two ingredients to me.
I think that that's part of it, but I also think that the propaganda system plays a big role in all
Well, there's a
this,
lot of that.
The way in which they sell these wars. They don't sell these wars that we think we should run the world, even though that's really what's behind it. They sell it as, you know, we have to come to the aid of these people who just want to have freedom and democracy. That's all they want to have, and that's all we want to do is help them get this freedom and democracy. But it's just, you know, it's crazy. Now, one of the things that really disturbs me is when I hear people, you know, lamenting with what happened to the soldiers coming back, but then there's a sort of triumphalism behind it, you know, which again is just going to mean that we're going to be dealing with more and more of these kids. And one of the real tasks at hand, and not quite sure how you go about it, but one of the real major tasks at hand should be trying to educate these young kids about what's in store for them when they go to war, because these kids have no idea what's in store for them. You know, they think it's going to be a John Wayne movie. You know,
Yeah.
And this is something that they need to be educated. And these people who just scream about, oh, how terrible what these soldiers have to go through, you know, we're guaranteeing that the next generation is going to have to go through it again, unless we can do something about stopping the endless wars, but also about educating kids. And because right now, with this sort of class-based volunteer army that we have, you know, you're not being forced to go to war, at least not forced in the normal sense of the term. It's sort of what they call the poverty draft. But if we can somehow, you know, get kids to understand what it is that's in store for them, then maybe they might have second thoughts about the next time.
I've always thought that the minimal age for enlistment should be raised to 22 or 24, and you'd have an older people.
I'm not sure that would even do much good.
Maybe
in the
not, but
context
the idea would be when you take
I actually think it goes back to our educational system. You know, our educational system is basically primed to turn out very obedient citizens, you know, and that's the way the American foreign policy works, is you have obedient citizens, and so if you wave the flag in front of their face, everybody jumps to attention and, you know, and sings a Star-Spangled Banner, you know, as they prepare to get you to go into the next war, you know. And so the first thing that needs to be done is we need to educate kids to think for themselves, and not just when the flag is waved in front of you to somebody stand to attention and get ready to go into the next war.
That's one of the benefits of having a war veterans creativity group, and that is to aid in the education of the general population what the reality of war is like for a young man or a young woman who goes and comes back and maybe in some way is able to express the horror or the fear or the friendship or the whatever. It's a way to educate the general public if war veterans are able to express themselves.
I have a. Oh, I'm sorry, Billy.
No, the only thing I just wanted to add for a minute is that I'm not sure. I know there's 960,000 claims backlogged in the VA right now.
Really?
Yeah, but I see there seems to be a romanticism. I hope people can understand what I'm trying to say. The way the Vietnam veterans were treated when they came home, it's almost like we're in a period of where there's been this incredible guilt. So we've gone completely the other way, and now we're romanticizing about all these young kids coming back, parades, but underneath of all of that propaganda, or whatever somebody wants to call it, is the fact that they're not being helped.
That's right.
I don't know exactly if anybody knows what I'm trying to say, but the more I watch it, and I've heard some of the Iraqi vets when they're coming back say, you know, I'm so tired of people thanking me for my service. Yeah. Or support our vets, and all they do is get that little yellow ribbon. What are they doing in the community at the different places to help the vets?
That's right, yeah.
So I think that's just something I feel that's really hard to overcome right now.
I think you're right.
You know?
Yeah, Bob?
I brought in a couple of other poems because like our compatriots in the Veterans for Peace, as soon as I think of military, I write an anti-war poem. And this
Bob
is
only speaks in poetry.
not always. I write some comic things, but this is certainly not a comic situation.
Right.
And this I wrote after we did the parade on Memorial Day. We stopped and did a service at one marker place. Then we went to the cemetery and there was another service there. And we do that each Memorial Day. And on Veterans Day we march. I wrote this poem. It's called Memorial Days, but D-A-Z-E for the days. And it goes like this. On Memorial Day, my friend and I placed a wreath at the Civil War marker. We're both veterans, he of the Korean War, I of World War II. As we stepped back and saluted, I realized we were saluting death. Within 1 century, the United States has almost continuously been at war. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Bosnia, Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan. And in those wars, 639,655 U.S. servicemen and women have been killed. Imagine what those 639,655 people and their families that never were might have accomplished. A lifelong friend of mine once said, mankind has been Mother Nature's greatest mistake. Well, a strange word, mankind, for man has been most unkind. 639,665 dead. Call them heroes if you wish, but they're still dead, replaced by markers and wreaths. On Memorial Day, Memorial Days. And then one quickie. This is called War Years, because we've mentioned there's always another one. The World War II veteran said, I'm 89 years old now and I spent 4 years at war. The Korean veteran said, I'm 81 years old now, I spent 3 years at war. The Vietnam veteran said, I'm 64 years old now, I spent 5 years at war. The young boy said, I'm 11 years old now. Hasn't there always been a war?
Oh boy, that is something. I'm wondering about the writing of poetry, but that's coming back, because I remember back in the, I'm guessing the middle 70s, when the Vietnam vets were coming back and writing a lot of poetry, and there was a point in which poetry became almost like front and center. You know, you go in a bookstore and there were just tremendous volumes on poetry. And a lot of it was being written by Vietnam vets coming back. And are we seeing that?
Well, I heard a news story the other day that the first Iraq veteran writings are really coming out to publish now, both poetry and novels and memoirs and things like that, that those folks are beginning to start publishing. They've probably been writing for years, and they'll be writing as part of Cole's group, I'm sure. But I think they're starting to, people will be reading more and more Iraq and Afghanistan veteran work, poetry and prose.
I'm not sure what actually caused that sort of upsurge in poetry in the like middle 70s, but it just seemed to be everywhere, and that was, I think, the main reason why a lot of the Vietnam vet poetry was being read. It wasn't just because it was being written by Vietnam vets, but it was because poetry had suddenly become like the rage. You know?
Well, my take, I'm not a poet for sure, but to me poetry, strikes to the heart of things, and I think it's probably partly for that reason that vets use it so much. I don't know.
And the newer veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq are more, as the younger generations are, they're more involved in electronic communications, and so that's why we're calling this a creativity group. And it's not just limited to poetry and writing, but it also includes photography, video, video to music, expression through music, and all sorts of creativity that people can do, not limited to poetry.
Yeah, as folks know, we have our chapter runs a poetry contest every year in the spring, and this is sort of the other end of the developmental scale. These are kids, kindergarten to college, and then an adult category too. But it's a Poetry for Peace contest. We've been doing, I think this is coming up to our 18th year of the contest, and we publish the winning poems too. So.
There used to be, I'm not sure if you call it a joke or not, but there used to be this little thing they used to tell about a guy who wrote a novel, and they asked him why he didn't write a short story. He said, I didn't have enough time. And I think it's probably even truer for poetry than it is for short stories.
I think people, veterans, having gone through whatever they've gone through, come home and don't write right away. It sits in their minds, and finally it reaches a coming out point. Sometimes it's their family. I know my brother Harold he's passed on now, but he was in the thick of things in World War II in Europe, and he had people killed all around him. He survived miraculously, came home unwounded. But he didn't say anything about it for years, and his children begged him after they became older to write it down, and finally he wrote maybe 2 or 3 things out of all the hazardous life that he had spent years in the Army. So it takes a while, it takes prodding in many cases to actually have it come to paper, come to fruition.
And of course it's go ahead.
No, I was just going, as a group, we've been very fortunate at the Veterans for Peace, locally, regionally, and nationally. There are some tremendous poets, writers, musicians, educators,
artists
yeah. that are members of the Veterans for Peace. It's phenomenal, and what also I really like about them is we're very active. And trying to work in the community, trying to build coalitions between the different veterans groups, as opposed to having, without naming any groups, but have that group here for World War II, this one for Korea, American Legion, whatever. We've tried hard to work with any and every veteran group that will work with us around these issues.
Yeah.
And
there's a wonderful poem by Rumi, who was a Muslim dervish. I'm not sure his.
Sufi,
he wrote
I
a
think.
long time ago, but it's just very quick. It's just like this: beyond right doing and beyond wrongdoing, there is a field. I will meet you there.
Yeah.
So beautiful.
And when I think of this poetry thing and writing and expressing, like in this group, you know, the treatment for trauma really is getting yourself into a safe and trusted place and telling it. It's as simple as that. And this group, and you know, it somehow is related to a more formal treatment situation, a group or individual. It's getting yourself into a safe spot where you're not going to be criticized or judged. It's as far away from the parade, you know, and the confetti as you can get. That's not where it's told. It's told in rooms and groups and between 2 people. It's told in AA meetings. It's told in a lot of places where people trust the ears they got and they tell it. That's what heals.
Well, we know that, you know, suppressing, you know, really tough feelings like that is not healthy at all. And any way you can do to get it out, to express it, is very positive.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, but I forgot, so that's okay. But I think another unique thing I like about this group is this is the only veterans group that I've worked in where our spouses or other, we have some people whose husbands have died, Agent Orange. They are in the organization and carrying on the work that their partner may have done. A lot of us have our partners who are involved with us at one way or the other. For example, my wife helps now coordinate the Poetry for Peace that Maxwell Money did for and Bob for all those years. So we're also lucky that we have people in our lives, in our personal home, family lives, that work with us, as opposed to us kind of going off just working as guys by ourselves as vets.
And they're associate members of VFP. They become
there's-
associate members. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we talk a little bit about the actual programs that you have going here in the Cape?
Well, certainly Cole and Max are running this group, which is great. One of the things we're doing as a chapter is Iraq Veterans Against the War, which is an organization that grew obviously out of the Iraq War and is related. It's sort of like a brother-sister organization almost to VFP. They have a project they call Operation Recovery, and they're working in some large military bases, usually in the West. Fort Hood is one of the places, a very large military base with an awful lot of people who've been going to be deployed and have been deployed. Lots of PTSD, very high suicide rate. This is Fort Hood. IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against the War, has a project there and at a couple other large military bases.
Lewis McChord,
Lewis McChord in the state of Washington, another problematic base in terms of lots of problems. Some of them treated and handled well and some of them not. But what they're trying to do is prevent the redeployment of traumatized troops. Anybody who's had combat stress related injury, and I've listed a bunch of them. You know, some of them are not PTSD, some of them are just anxiety or paranoia or depression or whatever. Lots of kind of
What's the
varieties.
term they use when you're sent back in? What do they call that?
redeployment?
No, there's a term that they use in Iraq when somebody would come back and he thought his service was over, and then suddenly he get
stop loss.
Stop loss.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah. The trouble with these wars have gone on an awful long time, and with an all-volunteer force, they've had to redeploy people. So there have been numerous cases where a medical services officer or a psychologist will declare somebody stress injured, again, having one of those diagnoses, and the commanding officer of the unit will want that person back to keep the force numbers up and will overrule the medical officer. I was in the middle of a situation like that in 2004 with a vet who had gone AWOL from a base, a Cape Cod vet, AWOL from a base in the southeastern part of the U.S. and clearly had PTSD, in my opinion. Long story, but ended up turning himself in, going back to his unit, and being readied for redeployment. You know, I was in dialogue with the medical officer at his base, and before I knew it, he was on meds and he was getting ready for redeployment. He was ultimately given an administrative discharge, did not get redeployed, but the trouble, this project of IVAW is to try to prevent, again, re-traumatization of people who have already been injured in some way, stress injured. In fact, what they're trying to do now, and we as an organization, we certainly support them emotionally, psychologically, and we also try to raise funds for them as well. What they're trying to do now is organize what they call an appeal for redress for service members and veterans' right to heal, which means apparently the appeal for redress is a protected form of communication for active duty service members to resolve an issue and seek redress through their congressional representatives. It is protected under the Military Whistleblower Protection Act that's supposed to keep service members safe. And what IVAW is trying to do, and we're supporting them in doing it, is to put pressure on congressional representatives and build up to open hearings about the right to heal. They call it the right to heal. That an injured person should not get redeployed, they should get healed. And
has that improved at all during the Obama years? Deploying people who are
I
suffering?
think as Iraq wore down, winded down, Afghanistan certainly hasn't wound down, although there have been some troops withdrawn. I think probably redeployments, I have never seen occur, but I suspect that multiple redeployments have eased as the troops are pulled out of those two places. I hope they have. But
there is a veterans bill before Congress right now, and my understanding, are you familiar with this? I can't think of the name of it, but it's a woman out in Wisconsin who has sponsored it, but it's a bill for veterans. It's winding its way through Congress, and part of the problem is that it's caught up in the wrangle over the presidential campaign because the Republicans don't want to give Obama anything at all. You know, it doesn't matter whether they would normally support it or not, and so it doesn't look like the bill's going to make it through the House.
Is that Tammy Duckworth?
Yeah, that's what it is. It is Tammy Duckworth. Yeah, she's the one who sponsored it.
Yeah.
And I was just sort of curious if you all had an opinion on that particular bill.
I don't know the bill. It's for more assistance to vets?
It has a lot of different aspects to it, but there's a good deal of money involved to go to the vets, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was at one time the head of the Wisconsin. Is it? I couldn't tell. We were having that conversation if it was Wisconsin or Minnesota, but she was the head of the state VA.
That's right.
And did a tremendous job. She also was I don't know if she reached the title of lieutenant colonel or not, but she was shot out of the air and lost her legs.
Yeah.
And
yeah, that's her.
so when she came back, she's just a real fighter for the veterans. But part of that and part of what this recovery is, one of the main complaints is that these people do not want to go back over medicated with antidepressants because just a second, if a drug slows you just for a second or 2 seconds, it could mean your life.
Yeah, sure.
And that's why they don't want to go back over there. And just to show you an example of it, locations of suicides that come with this, 83% is when they come back. 10% is over in Iraq and Afghanistan, and 7% is other, which I wasn't sure of. But this is all tied to the ones who are killing themselves quicker are the older veterans. The younger ones are not so quick to kill themselves, but the older veterans have had these multi-deployments. And they may just reach, I don't know, because I have never felt that way to hurt myself. But maybe, so I don't know, but maybe they just figure, I'm not going, I can't deal with this anymore. And the pain or something, which I don't know, overcomes. And
well, I came across a bunch of different articles that have to do with this, and one of them had to do with Vietnam vets. And they're saying that where the PTSD is really kicking in with the Vietnam vets is when they retire. Is that there are a lot of Vietnam vets who appeared to lead very normal lives. You know, they were married, they had a family, and they had a job. But once they retired and no longer had the job, then the PTSD was sort of kicking in.
Yeah, it's like delayed PTSD or something like that. Yeah.
It's also that they have something to keep themselves occupied.
Yeah,
A lot of these men are, that recovering alcoholics. They become workaholics. Their families never see them. They work 70, 80 hours a week, and then all of a sudden they retire, or they sell their business, or they cut back to 40 hours, and that's when they start having flashbacks, anger outbursts, inability to control their anger, really bad dreams, sleep disturbance is called, but really bad dreams is what I call it. And it all comes out when all of a sudden you're not occupying your mind with 80 hours of work a week.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, then I also came across a piece that said that August was the worst month for suicides.
Well, in July, I think it was, Billy, you were talking about this. In July, there were the number of suicides, active duty suicides exceeded the combat deaths in Afghanistan. Is that the figure?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
there were 38 in July, which is the highest rate, and that's for the U.S. Army. And the U.S. Army is the only one out of the 5 service branches that have an active program going on around the issue of suicide. And yet there's right now the highest. Last year, 2011, 26% of the military deaths were by combat, 20% of all military deaths were by suicide. And that's in the USA Today. So far this year, this is as of June 7th, there were 154 suicides in the first 155 days of 2012. So it's reached epidemics at 1 a day. And even Panetta, who is the Secretary of Defense, doesn't know what to do. And the head of the VA is General Shinseki.
Shinseki, yeah.
And he showed a lot of compassion and made some serious adjustments in the VA, but it all comes down to the fact that this is just like a snowplow, just pushing, and if everything is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's overwhelming the VA or Yeah, it's overwhelming the VA, and maybe some of the, I don't know how to get people, that's why I like working with the street. I like working with vets who, you know, I don't want to call them grunts, but are down to earth, but activism is a healing process.
Yeah.
So
They're two terrible statistics, but suicide deaths are ahead of war deaths, of combat deaths.
Oh.
And when you think about that, I mean, both are terrible. But what an insane thing that is. The guys who have been through it are killing themselves faster than the enemy is killing the troops overseas.
And that's not to mention that's just active labeled suicides. That's not to mention the slow death of drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'd like to turn a little bit to what I think is a real change that's taken place in, I'm not sure the military is even the right term to use, but what happened in the Iraq War was that we saw a real change, and that was the way in which the whole war became kind of privatized. You know, the role of civilians in the war itself. The Washington Post had an article in which the guy said that there, in 2007, there were like 180,000 civilians working in Iraq, you know, on behalf of the war. And what the Bush administration did more than anything else was to turn it into a profit-making venture. So you had all these corporations that were making a killing on it. And this is something that has kind of disturbed me in recent months with conversations I've had with progressive friends of mine who think that the U.S.'s foreign policy ventures are so disastrous, you know, that the U.S. is going downhill fast. And I think that they're just completely misunderstanding this, but because it has completely changed the whole military, the way in which we go about these wars. It's just completely changed. So yeah, it's a disaster for the American population, and it's obviously a disaster for the people we wage war on. But it's not at all a disaster for American corporations who are making a killing on these wars, and in a much bigger way than they ever have before in the past. I think that this is something that we have to come to grips with, is the fact that war making has really changed dramatically. You know, and Naomi Klein, in her book Shock Doctrine, she talked about what she called disaster capitalism complex, was actually the term that she used. And basically what she's saying is that capitalism itself has taken over, to a large extent, you know, the war making apparatus. There used to be this great dichotomy between what the government did and what was done among civilians, and now there's almost no distinction between the two at all.
Well, it also...
No, the only thing I was going to say, the other thing I would note in that is that a lot of these people who are militarizing the society are people who have never been in the military. I mean, I'll throw it out. We're not supposed to say one way or the other, so I won't. But for Romney to call for us to go into Libya or Syria and pound in his chest against the Chinese, these are the sons and daughters of us that are going to go, not his 5 boys. They're not going to walk point anywhere, and that is why I feel upset sometimes, because it's the chicken hawks, and I know that's a name thing, but it's the people who've never been to war, who are sending us to war.
Oh, sure.
That privatization also certainly makes money for corporations, but it also allows the actual armed forces to stay smaller. And as Billy, you were referring earlier when we were talking to the other 1%, we talk about the 1% of the country with a lot of the wealth, disproportionate amount of the wealth. The other 1%, or the not talked of 1%, are those serving in the military. Oh, yeah. And supplemented by private corporations, it allows it to stay small and not touch the general population as much.
Well, you know, what you might call the Blackwater syndrome, because Blackwater is probably the most famous of these companies. Yeah. But it went way beyond just the war itself. I mean, you know, Blackwater was all over Katrina. I mean, they were absolutely all over the place. And this is the kind of thing I'm talking about, is the way in which the whole war-making apparatus. And then when you look at what's happened in the Obama administration, You know, they have pretty much endorsed the worst aspects of the Bush administration, you know, the denial of habeas corpus, spying on the American public. There's no effort to wind down any of this stuff. These people in Guantanamo are never going to be tried. They're never going to have a trial. They're going to sit there until they die, essentially, you know. And this is the Obama administration. And the real difference between the Obama administration and the Bush administration is that under Bush, they wanted to arrest you and torture you, and under Obama, they just want to kill you. They don't want to arrest you at all.
Well, there are certainly some progressive Democrats and other progressives that aren't terribly happy with Obama. But once again, I
but
feel
the point that Billy's making, although he doesn't want to say it outright, the point he's making is absolutely true. If you look at the people that Romney has surrounded himself with, you know, it would take us back to the Bush years is what it would do. Because all those neocons, you know, that were in the Bush administration, they're all advising Romney now. In the situation, I mean, I just absolutely hate Obama and virtually everything he's done in foreign policy, but I have no doubt whatsoever that it would be considerably worse under Romney.
the Republicans are keeping, you know, Cheney and Wolfowitz and even Colin Powell. I mean, they're not; those guys aren't up front, but those are the folks that really.
Unless you happen to watch Fox News.
Yeah.
Right.
They're all over Fox News.
He has 17 of the 25 members of Bush's cabinet is now in his cabinet.
Yeah.
But Powell could break when Romney chose out Putin by name at the convention. He was contacted by General Powell, knock it off. That's not the Cold War we're fighting anymore.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are awful loose.
More questions than there are answers all the way. And you look at the newspapers outside of the action that's happened most recently in the embassies around, but prior to this embassy outbreak of attacks. You pick up the paper and you wonder, where's the war news? It's certainly not on page 1. It's not above the fold ever on the front page. You have to look for it, and chances are it isn't in there.
Yeah.
Put on the news at night, the network news, aside from a breaking news like, again, the embassy outbreaks. You get a 10-minute newscast, politically usually, then there are a few commercials, there's one quick news break, maybe a feature item, then more commercials, and then a funny thing happened in the news today, and they have a kicker on the end, and they have a couple of closing commercials, and the half hour is over.
Yeah.
And where has there been information about where this country is in the world today?
I remind people that we have soldiers in war zones all the time, right now. And
how many
not in the
countries?
news.
How many countries do we have bases in?
Well, we have over 1,000 military bases that ring the globe.
Yeah.
You know, and Obama is sending troops to Australia, so things are actually kind of escalating.
And there's the African command that just got created.
I just wanted to return very briefly to the issue about the soldiers themselves. I think one of the real differences between what's going on now, what's been going on since the Vietnam War, and what happened during the Vietnam War is that we had a draft during the Vietnam War, and so the whole country was sort of kind of tied up in it, you know, and now there is no draft, you know, and so many people in the country just have kind of washed their hands of the war whatsoever. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I know who just have completely hidden their head in the sand over these wars, and just they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to hear about it. Mm-hmm. They're not directly affected by it, you know, so they just kind of pretend it's not there. And I think that this is a really serious problem. You know, how do you get the rest of the country involved in issues to stop these future wars? Because again, I know I'm repeating myself, but just coming back to this, it's infuriating to think that you're trying to do everything you can for these vets, but you know, unless we do something about this constant war making, there's just going to be more and more generations of them. You know, in your work, it's never going to be done, and this just to me is just very, very infuriating.
And all these veterans are simply, all these soldiers, men and women, are simply doing their duty They're doing their duty as they believe it's a right thing to do for their country, and then they end up, very many of them, the combat veterans especially, end up traumatized and being their whole lives affected, their families' lives, the community, the lives of their community.
Well, I would
No way to solve a problem.
No, I would just say that, just from a personal standpoint, I think that the soldiers are being sacrificed on the altar of American capitalism is what it really comes down to, because American foreign policy has always been dedicated to the needs of corporations from almost as far back as you want to go, you know, and that's what it's about. And it infuriates me when I hear people talk about the soldiers and what great heroes they are. Of course, when they're in a combat situation, many of them, probably most of them, act very heroically, but that's not what people mean when they talk about being a hero. They're talking about they're protecting our way of life. They're protecting our freedoms and all this, you know. And the truth is that since the Second World War, there's no relationship between any intervention or war on our part and any kind of freedom whatsoever. The only freedom is what Noam Chomsky calls the freedom to rob and exploit. You know, that's the freedom that they're fighting for. And unfortunately, these soldiers have no way of knowing that they're 18 years old. They've gone through schooling, right, you know, to turn out obedient citizens, and they do what they think is the patriotic thing. They're doing, you know, what they think is the patriotic duty. But unfortunately, in my view, it's not what's happening. They're being sacrificed on the altar of profits for these large corporations. That's what it's about.
But Richard, I think all of us, in one way or other, believe what we were doing was right. By the time we find out that maybe what we were doing was not right, we've already done the damage. The damage has already been done to us, and now we're 40, 45, 50 years old. So, but because when they get inside you in boot camp, you've already started to get screwed up before you even get out of boot camp. Sure. And God knows the things that some of these people saw, I didn't. And I can't imagine what it would be like.
Well, that's why I think it's important to try and stop these future wars in whatever way that we can.
The first ribbon that goes on you
We're coming to an end here. I'm sorry. I hate to end it. But,
I was going to ask you that if we could just shift real quick to give a few.
We don't have time. We're out. I'm sorry. We're just out of time. I'm sorry. Thank you all for joining us. Until next time, and do whatever you can for peace and social justice. Thank you very much. Today we're actually starting our 11th year on the air, and because of that I want to put out a thank you to the studio here for continuing to support the show, and our crew members as well. And we do have an email address. It's talkingtogetherfeedback@gmail.com, and we're interested in both pro and con reactions, so please get in touch. Now today we're going to be talking about the various issues that the Cape Cod chapter of Veterans for Peace is involved in, and I'm here with 4 members of the Veterans for Peace. The title of the show is Veterans for Peace and the Fallout from Constant War. And Billy Stewart is directly opposite me, and Bob Silverberg, and Duke Ellis, and Cole Morton sitting right next to me. So Bob, why don't you start off with, I understand that you have a poem that'll kind of get the show going.
Okay, and the last line of the poem is very, very definitely part of our discussion today. My poem is called Recipe for War. Use a pentagon-shaped bowl. Take two opposing points of view. Add many.
What I'll probably touch on, what I will touch on today is some of the homeless and some of the food pantry things that we do at the Non-Vet Center. And we'll try to very briefly touch, even though I don't have all the information, this new brain trauma center that we've inherited from the Grace family in New Seabury. We signed the papers 2 days ago to take over this building that was given to us by the Grace family. The basics is this: the father was a Marine during World War II, came under heavy fire, and made a little pledge that, God, if I ever get out of this foxhole and home alive, I'll do anything you want me to. But he forgot about it until he came home and his younger daughter got a virus or something that caused brain damage. And so she passed, and he created this brain center in her memory. And it had been working, but he passed. And then the son didn't know what to do with it anymore. So he made a phone call to the Veterans Office in Boston, Coleman Nee, who also is an Iraqi veteran, and trying to find out what he could do. He recommended the Non-Vet Center, Cape Cod Outreach Center, and so we've been in meetings and everything for about a year. It's a wonderful building. It's a great gift. But I've been involved with the Veterans Movement now going on since '67 when I was discharged, one way or the other, and like the other brothers.
Parts imagined wrongs, minus 1 part rationality. Stir until overheated. Mix in the following ingredients: raw recruits, National Guard troops, body counts, government lies, corporate payoffs, friendly fire, bigotry, rape, and collateral damage. Omit civilian deaths. Prolonged baking in desert heat for multiple tours of duty. While waiting for a result, pierce with explosive roadside devices. After too many years, declare a victory. Generally discard surviving leftovers.
Very good, Bob. Thank you very much for that. Cole, you want to start us off?
I'm going to, what?
You want to start us off?
Okay, all right. I'm just here to mostly to plug a war veterans creativity group that is being started on October 11th, 2012. I'm just going to read from the poster that we're going to put around. And it's a new, small group facilitated by war veterans. Veterans of all wars are welcome to participate. The group will include poetry, writing, art, photography, video, etc. The idea is to express yourself without judgment. All group sessions are private and confidential. The first session, as I said, is October 11th, 2012. They will be every Thursday at 6 p.m. Walk-ins are welcome, and they will be at the Hyannis Vet Center, not to be confused with the Veterans Clinic, not to be confused with the Non-Vets Association Outreach Center. They will be at the Hyannis Vet Center at 474 West Main Street. And I really want to stress that both women and men, war veterans, are included. These will be small groups. And also, we're gearing towards those who have little or no experience in expressing themselves creatively. Prior experience is not required. As a matter of fact, maybe it's preferred.
Okay, Duke?
This is a great example, I think, of the kind of project that VFP members are involved in. Max Money, another member of our chapter, is doing the group with Cole. And it's just another way that Veterans for Peace actualizes its purpose to abolish war, by preventing war, by revealing the true costs of war, and by healing the casualties of war, military and civilian. And just to orient people towards our chapter, most people probably know we've been on the Cape for about 20 years. And a year and a half ago, we decided to dedicate our chapter specifically to healing the wounds of war, especially the hidden wounds of war, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, military sexual trauma, suicide, depression, anxiety, that kind of thing. And we renamed our chapter in honor of a Marine Corps Reserve vet, Corporal Jeffrey Lucy, with the blessings of his parents, who a year after he was back from deployment, he was part of the initial invasion of Iraq, was back about a year when he, back about 6 months when he began to display serious symptoms of PTSD and was having a lot of trouble. Had difficulty engaging the VA and had some difficult problems, obviously, but took his own life almost a year after returning home. So in March of 2011, we dedicated our chapter in his name, and we dedicated part of our work to healing the wounds of war.
Yes, I was actually at that. I believe it was at Barnstable High School.
Yeah,
That was a wonderful event, I thought.
Yeah.
Billy.
Well, I do the outreach coordination for the Veterans for Peace. I also am on the board of directors at the Non-Vet Center, the Cape Cod Veterans Outreach. With the Veterans for Peace, I think that both of those folks just mentioned what we've been